Good afternoon and welcome back to day 3 of Real Estate Live UK's October 2021 programme. Our weeks of free to attend virtual events run 3 times a year in February, June and October. The programme is brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the organisations that have contributed to the exceptional lineup taking place this week. During sessions this week, places across the UK have been showcasing investment opportunities, and industry-leading experts from the public and private sectors have been discussing new ideas and topical issues relating to property. You can view the full programme of sessions taking place on our website at www.realestatelive.co.uk. Several of our panels and presentations are linked to our 3 key themes for the week: culture and community, sustainable places, and wellness. Right now, we have our second lunchtime talk of the week with Kate Orwin, Leasing Director UK at Unibail Rodamco Westfield. But just before we start, I'd like to remind you, the audience, to please feel free to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A function. And now I'm pleased to hand over to our chair for this session, Mark Faithfull, Editor of Retail Property Analyst. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Callum. Very much appreciated those opening words. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this lunchtime session. And in a few moments, I'll be introducing Kate, or asking Kate to introduce herself, before we get talking about the very topical issue of retail. First thing I really want to say was, obviously, I think we all appreciate that even prior to the pandemic, there were very challenging times for retail, and we were seeing a period of real transformation. COVID has obviously thrown completely unexpected challenges into that situation, and also has really accelerated a lot of the transformation that's been going on. We've lost quite a few familiar names. We've seen quite a few new things happen. And even today, we've seen the arrival of the Amazon 4-star store, the first one in the UK. So there are things changing all the time. It's a very dynamic market. I think one of the things we want to do with this quite short session is really look at what's happening in the future, and also think of a few reasons to be positive, because certainly there's also a lot of negative retail news out there, but clearly the situation is much more nuanced than that. There are a lot of people doing very well, and there are a lot of sectors doing very well as well. So I think it's important that we think about the whole picture. So anyway, that's enough from me from my introductions. We've got plenty to get through. Would also really encourage you to ask questions, and we'll get through as many as we can in the time available. But firstly, Kate, welcome, and I wonder if you could just say a few words about yourself and your role at Westfield.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope you do ask questions. I'm Kate Orwin, UK Leasing Director at Unibail Rodamco Westfield. For those of you that don't know, we are a developer and construction business, but probably best known as an owner and operator of shopping centres across the UK and Europe. I've actually only been at URW 6 months, so having come from Hammerson before that, so fairly new in the role. I'm responsible for leasing strategy across our 2 key assets, Westfield London and Westfield Stratford, as well as our occupier relationships and also the career development of the team at URW.
Thanks, Kate. Well, obviously, leasing strategy is going to be one of the key things with those 2 schemes, and obviously they're both very well known, have been real flagship schemes and encouraged a lot of flagship retailers in. But clearly there's been a lot going on. So I wonder whether you could just talk initially about some of the adaptations you've made, and also some of the ones that are coming up going forwards.
Yeah, certainly. It has been a tough 2 years, there's no denying it. And I know we're not going to get doom and gloom, but it has had a huge impact on retail. The retail industry in the UK is the second biggest employer. So there's been millions of people affected by it, and thousands of businesses. But it is not all doom and gloom. And actually, I've been really cheered as I've started back in my new role at URW from April. We reopened, and the level of interest and inquiries that are coming through and from such different operators is actually given me every reason to be cheerful. Just to touch on some of the things, for example, last week we had an amazing event which really combined the physical and digital world. So Lady Gaga chose to launch her new album, Love for Sale, with us. So we had fan zones set up at 20 flagships across the UK and States. So they were tablecloth events where you could go and get special merchandise, and it was live streamed just for our fans and then followed up onto YouTube. So we had about 1 million people engaged with that. And that just is a great example of what could have been purely a digital event actually choosing to have a physical presence. So that's a great example of one of the new things we've done recently.
I think you've obviously done quite a few animations at the Westfields over the years. is that something you see you're going to be doing more of? I mean, I remember you also had the TikTok collaboration in the summer which I think was at White City, if I'm correct.
I mean, absolutely. More and more, it's all about experience. So the TikTok house was absolutely incredibly successful. It was booked out within hours, and at that, we actually had some of the best creators on TikTok. Have to say, I'm not an expert, but they were very, very popular and booked out in no time at all. We've also got the Netflix Army of the Dead experience going on at the moment, which is actually really good fun, a great VR experience where you can shoot zombies. So it's a good stress reliever, I would say. So yeah, more and more of that. And actually, that's really backs up. We just recently did a big piece of research where we interviewed 15,000 customers across Europe and asked them what they thought the future of retail would be. It's the Westfield How We Shop report. So it's available. Anyone can look it up online. But the biggest thing that came out of that is 60% of the customers we interviewed thought experience would take up 50% of the floor space in shopping centres from 2025. So I think that shows the direction of travel that customers want to see us going in.
Well, actually, that brings me neatly on to my next question. Obviously, when shopping centres first reopened, there was a lot of consumer behaviour around just people getting used to being out again, and the feeling that they wanted to feel safe and that hygiene was being taken seriously and all those kind of things. We've obviously moved on from that stage now, but I'd be interested in your views on whether you're seeing any changes in behaviour from pre-pandemic, just in terms of what people are looking for, what they do, whether, there was a lot of purposeful shopping at the beginning, whether that's been maintained.
Yes, I think it has, not to the extent it was when we first reopened. Without doubt, sales are performing better than footfall. So footfall has recovered well, but I wouldn't say it's quite back to where it was. But sales are keeping up, which is excellent news. And I think the big day out is a key sort of factor that's very present. People are coming for a reason to enjoy themselves. They still want to touch and feel products. They want to be with their friends. They want to eat out. The restaurants reopening was absolutely key. That's made the world of difference. And we continue to see new openings in the restaurant area and lots of people spending longer at Westfield.
And in terms of the occupiers, you said that, obviously I know you can't talk about anything that's perhaps, it's not signed, sealed and delivered yet, but in terms of any trends you've seen, obviously we have certain sectors like athleisure, for example, has been incredibly successful, even while perhaps some other fashion areas have been struggling. But are you seeing any particular types of occupants or more international occupants, or, where are you kind of seeing the interest from?
You're right that sports and athleisure has had an amazing performance over COVID and continues to. Absolutely incredible. And so we are upsizing many of our sports and athleisure, as well as introducing new brands in that arena. So there's definitely more to come. Next year you'll see quite a few openings in that arena. And then secondly, a really exciting new concept opened actually on Monday called Situ Live. It's really interesting because it's actually a shop that doesn't sell anything. It's the first, if you like, pure showroom store. So it's an immersive experience which curates the best innovative and technology brands. So there's a kitchen area, a home area, where you can see, for example, a Bang & Olufsen TV hooked up to a Bose speaker. And the team there are very Apple-esque in their ability to educate the customers and show how one technology can relate to the other. So brands are paying them to be represented in the store. There's a lovely Maserati car on the front as well. I'm not sure how many takers there will be for that. But essentially, you scan a QR code when you see a product you like. It gives you more information about it, shows you where you can buy it, either in one of the Westfield centres or online. So it's a new way of retailing, which I think is really exciting. So
no, definitely. Yeah. Very interesting. And I think it's interesting, that distinction. There you're obviously be talking about some quite high-end products, about that requirement for service. And I think that's obviously one of the things that people have missed, whether that be that high-end or even if it's just, having a cup of coffee and somebody serving it to you, in a friendly manner, hopefully.
Exactly. And I think actually another area that's really growing sort of on that note is the automotive, so let's call it a revolution. It is, isn't it? 2030, there will be no more diesel or petrol cars, new cars for sale. Simple as that. So, electric cars are having to evolve faster than ever. And we've really seen an uptick in interest from those car brands. And what's interesting is, if you think about it, when you go to a traditional showroom on the edge of a city, you've already made a decision probably to buy a car at that point, and you're going there. But the brands here want to capture customers perhaps before they can even drive, and certainly to capture the female customer, which is harder to get on the edge of town. And you're going into a beautiful experience and actually being educated on electric cars and understanding the brand, building a brand loyalty before you're finally ready to make that decision to purchase. So we've got all sorts of people in at the moment: Polestar, Cupra, Genesis, and that's the same globally as well as in the UK. So I see that being a real trend moving forward.
And I've got a question here. And obviously one of the thorny questions for any kind of shopping centre is about anchor tenants.
Yes.
So obviously department stores has been one of, apart from the premium end, has been one of the areas that struggled. Where do you see that in terms of the role of department stores within your schemes, but also what you see as the new anchors?
That's a great question, and that's so relevant. At the moment at Westfield London, we have House of Fraser and an empty Devon store. Well, it's not empty because Netflix are in it. But both of those projects are some of my key ones. And what I'm really keen to do is introduce new uses. I think we feel in terms of anchor stores that we're fairly well provided for at both assets, and there's a chance to do something different. And that could cover all sorts of things. We're not there yet, but it might be co-working, it might be medical. It'll certainly be more leisure and more entertainment. So those are the kind of directions that we're going in. But I think what you can't forget is the expense of repurposing department stores, and that's a challenge across the UK for landlords. It is quite a challenge to make that stack up, and you need the right occupiers in there to do that. So yeah, a challenge, but quite a fun one, I think.
Well, actually, you've touched on the other question that we've had in, which was about refurbishment and development, and whether there are any plans beyond the kind of usual reconfiguring going on for either of the Westfields at the moment.
Yeah, well, there certainly are. At the moment, we're on site at what we call Cherry Park, which is 2,200 new residential units at Stratford being built now. That's also got a big leisure box beneath it. We've got planning application in at Westfield London for 1,700 homes. So it's about looking at the periphery and how we can almost build cities within cities, hotels also, and office plans for a further office at Stratford. So all the time we're looking at what we can do. In terms of investing in refurbishing Westfield London, I think that will come on the back of some of these projects like the repurposing of the department stores in a phased manner rather than in one big go.
And presumably also these additional elements, I mean, obviously from your point of view as a business, it's important because it's helping you to monetize the space that you own. But secondly, if you've got a lot of residents on site, that's obviously going to perhaps change some of the mix of what you're looking for to produce in the shopping centre, because you're going to have a lot more people with maybe daily needs or evening needs or all the things that go with living in a local area.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The community is absolutely the heart of everything. And if you're building residential next to you, it does change the needs. I think there's 5,000 homes being built around the site at Westfield London in the next 5 years. So that's a lot of new residents coming, and certainly entertainment and food, eating out is really, really key. But the community use is vital, and our partnership with the NHS is another really good example. We've vaccinated 150,000 people between our assets, as well as having COVID testing centres and a plasma donor centre. So again, really important for residents. And that's why, we're looking at other uses, medical use, etc., which is going to come even more important for the local community.
And presumably they're not the sorts of things that you'd have ever imagined talking to me about on a webinar 2 years ago. They're not the sorts of things you thought would be extolling what you've been able to do over the last 18 months.
Yeah, perhaps not. But saying that, the trend for aesthetically enhancing yourself has been going on for quite some time, hasn't it? So we've seen therapy and skin and laser and other, quite main brands now opening stores for Botox, for laser treatment, and more of that's coming, dental, etc. I think Love Island is to blame myself, but I don't know.
So who would have known that Love Island would be so influential in the development of shopping centres? There's a moral in there somewhere.
We're influenced by everything that popular culture has got to throw at us. The more the merrier.
Well, interesting. I mean, even some of the names we've dropped in over the course of the short conversation so far, were not names that, again, we would have used a couple of years ago, which probably does illustrate the pace of change.
You mentioned what makes medical. It so exciting is,
no, absolutely.
Who wouldn't want to be in a job where you're doing something completely different? It's accelerated, as you said, the decline of the old traditional retailers and made us move on more quickly.
You mentioned medical a couple of times, and I think that's quite interesting, because I think that for anyone that's looked at how shopping centres have been developing, the other components you've talked about have become, obviously it started with leisure and F&B, residential has become bigger and bigger. Interested in the opportunities around medical. Again, you obviously mentioned a couple of the sort of day-type treatments, whether that might be Botox or dental. But, presumably there are opportunities for, larger scale medical. And again, that does, apart from the fact it's a community facility, that does also bring it with it the fact that people visit people who are in hospital or having treatments, and they might want something to do, while they're waiting around.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge opportunity. You probably saw in the press this week or last week, the NHS confirming that they're opening 40 diagnostic centres around the country. So both the NHS and private treatment. There's such a backlog in medical operations and the diagnostics particularly. So there's a huge opportunity there. Fertility is another area. But it does come with some quite significant physical constraints, which I don't think landlords are used to. For example, a fertility clinic, the vibrations are absolutely key. So clearly we sit over a tube line. So you've got to really think about where you can put a use like that. And in some more secondary centres, I'm well aware that they are talking to the NHS about actual new hospitals and to private people as well about smaller hospitals. So there's a huge growth area there, I think, all across the country, not just London.
And the other area that's often obviously talked about is logistics.
Yes.
You've obviously got the logistical requirements of those tenants you've already got in, because more and more of them are going to be doing click and collect or something that lies online and offline. And one of the reasons why obviously shopping centres are suitable for other uses is because they tend to be very well connected, because that's what was done in the first place. Again, whether there are opportunities for that actually to be used as a distribution point as well for, Amazon be the obvious name. But again, do you see opportunities around both of those?
There certainly are. There really are, particularly in the cities around the UK where low emission zones are coming in. And so certainly in my previous role at Hammerson, which was more a regional portfolio, there were many discussions about how we could use space in the service yard as logistical hubs for last mile delivery, particularly from electric vehicles. So you get a huge electric lorry coming in and then electric bikes, cars going out for that last mile. So absolutely, there is huge opportunity, I think, around the UK. It's slightly more challenging in our assets because the service yards are so heavily used. There's perhaps less room for that, but certainly something we're open to and looking at.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, these shopping centres were developed at a particular time when, the requirements were laid out in a particular way. As you said, with all these opportunities, they are clearly opportunities, but the challenge is obviously that you've got a big chunk of physical space, and doing things to bricks and mortar is never cheap.
No, I mean, the flexibility in the space is a real issue. And when you're looking at the likes of co-working or converting space into office, you need the natural light. You need to make sure the floor plates are the right distance apart. It is very difficult in an environment like that to be as flexible as you'd like to be. And I think that is something developers of the future need to think very, very carefully about. That it is not necessarily being built for one use only. It could be multiple uses as in the life of the building.
In terms of the traditional tenants, the retailers that came into the schemes when they were opened, are you seeing sort of a change in requirements from them? And also, are they open to all the different changes that you're making around your schemes as well that are on the non-retail side?
I haven't seen huge changes from them, actually. I think that the core occupiers that are trading really well, H&M, Next, Primark, they have upsized with us and remain in flagship stores. So that's great. And, I don't necessarily see that changing going forward. I think what we are seeing is more and more new fashion retailers coming up, that digital trying out the physical. And I think we'll see lots more of that coming forward. And again, that's a challenge for landlords to make sure we've got the right space to allow these tenants to try it out. So they may be white box units, smaller units. So again, making sure flexibility is there and you can provide what the occupier needs to be a success.
And I guess if we went back to the sort of role that you hold now, sort of 10 years, it would have been quite straightforward in many ways, because you'd have been looking at, it all would have been about rents. It would have been about getting retailers in, especially for flagship schemes. There tended to be probably more retailers wanting to come in that there were spaces. So it was kind of, I suppose, kind of the jigsaw of just getting people in and maximising what you were doing. Clearly now, the future and success of shopping centres is going to be much more about how all these relationships between the different occupants work, and about deciding who actually adds more to the shopping centre than just the fact that they're there. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how you're actually approaching that now, beyond obviously some of the things we've been talking about already.
Yeah, I think it's vital, actually. Relationships are key, and it's one of the core parts of my role is to ensure that we not only generate relationships with new occupiers, but maintain strong relationships with our existing, and that helps a lot with our international leasing team. It's a almost worldwide platform that we're playing on, so that is very helpful. But I think one of the major challenges as well in the UK is the rate system. So I'll come back to the rest of your question, but it's interesting when you're speaking to an international occupier who's considering opening a store with you in Malta, Netherlands, or in Hamburg, and you look at the UK and you've got rates, occupier costs 10 times that of Europe. So that is a huge barrier to entry, and it's a real barrier as well to the other uses we're talking about, to the office, to medical, and trying to get that sorted is probably one of the key challenges for our industry in the next few years. Is vital, and that will ensure that more innovation can be delivered, more experience, more brand sponsorship, use of physical space makes sense when the occupational costs are affordable.
Yes, I mean, I've in previous sessions, we've talked about high street, and business rates is one of the first things that comes up, and it does feel like the can keeps on getting kicked on down the road. And although there were obviously some moratoriums, it does seem to be an issue that's just massively affecting physical retail and their ability to compete, and also obviously to compete with online.
It's a huge impact, and completely, as you say, an inequitable playing field at the moment, and it has to be sorted. I hope it will.
Changing subject somewhat, and I'm pleased to see somebody's asked a question I was about to ask, which was about encouraging tenants to focus on net zero and sustainability agenda. So I wonder whether you could talk about what you're doing as a business, and then what you're doing as a business to help the occupants that occupy your shopping centres.
And again, harking back to the How We Shop report, it was in the number 2 or number 1, number 2 in terms of what occupiers are saying is important to them. And it's not, in terms of our customers, it's not something they wish for us to do. It's what they expect. Sustainability has to be the top of the agenda. And you can see that if you walk down Westfield, London this week, you can see that Primark, right in the front of their prime selling space, have devoted the key part of their selling space to sustainability and what they are doing. And that will be increasingly the case. I was with the chief exec of Loan Design Club yesterday, and she said, again, the most asked question of the brands in there is, what are your sustainability credentials? That is what the Gen Z, the younger people, and increasingly everybody wants to know. And thank God, about time. So in terms of what URW doing, it's a lot. We already, both assets are run completely on 100% renewable energy. In common with many other landlords, we're looking at putting PV panels across all the roofs. We've already got some, looking at more. We've opened with Timberland, actually, as a partnership and a sponsored garden. It's a lovely little oasis next to Westfield, London, which is also used by special needs schools for education and for a bit of a peaceful place to go. So that's great. And for us, it's also about looking at the sustainability credentials of the brands we're trying to put in. You won't get it right 100% of the time, but it's what customers are asking for on our website. Who's sustainable? What are they doing? It's absolutely the number 1 trend going forward.
And it's
not a trend. It's
yeah, no. Well, I mean, interesting. You mentioned Primark there, who've obviously made some big commitments in the last couple of weeks, and obviously they are a retailer that's had some criticism along with the rest of the fast fashion industry for kind of their role in the whole sustainability issues. You mentioned community as well. I mean, again, interesting because if you look at White City, that was developed at a time when shopping centres tended to still be, kind of their own world.
Yeah.
Obviously, by the time Stratford was developed, it's a much more open scheme, much more open to the areas around it. Wondering about whether that makes a difference in terms of community interaction and some of the things that you're doing in that field.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It is a fairly enclosed centre, Westfield London, but we are trying really hard to change that as much as you physically can with a shopping centre. So Westfield Square is a great example, which is where John Lewis is. We've just finished actually fully letting the square now, and that's a mix of entertainment, Japanese supermarket. We've got some lovely restaurants there. So that then connects beautifully into the new residential area, the Berkeley Homes area, and the area where our new residential will sit. So there is great connectivity there. Yeah, we're very lucky that we are so connected to the transport hubs as well. And I think as you see some of the new uses appearing at Westfield, you'll see external accesses being created to try and integrate those better. But it is hard retrofitting that into an existing centre, there's no doubt about it. And again, something I'm sure developers of the future will be looking very closely at.
No, absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting for future developments and refurbishments about creating that flexibility so that it's not so expensive to change things, because clearly, as we've seen from the last 5-10 years, some of the changes could have been predicted, but some of them have come completely out of left field, and then you're suddenly left with a centre that has to respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the capital cost is huge of reconfiguring space. It really is.
A couple of questions to finish off, because I'm aware that we're coming up to the end of our time. The first one is, and this can be a personal one, in terms of some of the occupiers that you've been working with, and I mean, you mentioned the Netflix animation as well. Are there any particular projects that particularly excited you so far? They don't have to be big, but just ones that you've really liked.
Oh, there's lots coming up, you see, which I can't really talk about. But I think, as you say, working with new brands has been really exciting. Talking to Netflix about what the future might look like. And particularly talking to online only at the moment occupiers and how they might try out physical space in the future, and how they might integrate those two things, the digital experience and the physical, together. That's probably, for me, one of the most exciting, as well as the sustainability point, which I'm personally very passionate about as well. And
presumably, I think one of the interesting things about those new players is that they're obviously arriving without any preconceived idea of how retail works or what a shopping centre is. That they're just coming with a completely fresh set of ideas, which is possibly brings some naivety, but also means that they're not burdened with kind of the 20 years of experience is great, but also clearly you've been brought up with a certain way of doing things.
Yeah, they're pretty shocked by the business rates as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and yeah, they are looking at therefore different shop fits as well, different designs of their spaces, so that as it is more of a journey, of an education, of an experience, rather than an acquisition of a product. Absolutely, that is key.
And obviously, it's also a vindication that, I mean, I was on Carnaby Street the other week for the Queen pop-up, but there were a lot of whether it be digital or just brands from any type of community or culture that seem to actually still be really valuing that opportunity to get into physical space and get in front of people. I
mean, absolutely. You think of them almost as it's a marketing exercise. The footfall that you've got going past, 32 million in London, 52 at Stratford. You can't really pay for that online in the same way as having those eyeballs on your store, on your product, and it's the chance to engage and build loyalty from those customers. That is what is key. And then they go on to spend online in the future. So yeah, it's vital.
And just very finally, I said we'd try and finish on an upbeat note. In terms of what you're looking at over the next 12 months, what you can talk about, what's making you feel positive and cheerful about the prospects for shopping centres generally?
I think, as we've already touched on, it's the new type of occupiers that are coming into the centres, which will add to the whole and make the customer experience and journey more exciting than it already is. It's not one dimension, it's multiple dimensions, and its connection to the community as well. It is absolutely key. So I guess for me, finishing off some of the repurposing of the department stores is exciting, and that will certainly change the shopping centre dynamics, which I think it needs to. So yeah, those are probably the highlights for me.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, Kate. I'm a little bit aware that I've rushed you through a lot of questions there because there was so much territory to cover. I wanted to try and maximise the half an hour we had available to us. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for your questions and for tuning in. Handing back over to you, Callum.
Thanks very much, Mark, and to yourself, Kate, as well. It was a really important and engaging conversation just now. So thank you very much to both of you for that. There is still more to come from Real Estate Live UK with one more session at 3 p.m. Hosted in partnership with Capital West London, where we will ask, what is the role of digital places in driving investment into West London? You can book on to this session and those taking place later in the week by visiting the programme page on our website. That link again is www.realestatelive.co.uk. Thank you all once again for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.